Good day. Considering the extended lockdown, time for another presentation. When a court of law is vested with a superlative power, and if that power is used to attain substantial justice to the needy, then there is divinity attached to that power. This is precisely the scope and width of the inherent power of the High Court. In many spheres of the administration of criminal justice, the High Court in India exercises a jurisdiction which has the distinctive description of being called inherent. The inherent jurisdiction of the court may be invoked in an apparently inexhaustible variety of circumstances. The concept of inherent is indeed so amorphous that it seems to defy the challenge to determine its quality and its limits. Yet, there's always questions about inherent powers like what is its nature, its juridical basis, its limits, what's its capacity to diversify, and its viability. And these questions demand and deserve an answer. It is in answer to these varied questions that I intend presenting this talk, focusing on the origin and the concept of inherent powers, its growth, the recognition of this power under the old and the new CRPC, its interplay with Articles 226 and 227 of the Constitution, and what is it that the superior courts constantly ponder while exercising the inherent power. Firstly, what's the meaning of the word inherent? Inherent means something that's permanent, which is essential, and which is vested by its very character. Second, what is inherent power of the High Court under criminal jurisprudence? The inherent power of the High Court is seen under Section 482 CRPC. This section stands in solitary splendor. It's not a power which is conferred by the code, but one which the High Court already has in it and is merely preserved and recognized by the code. When is the inherent power exercised? The power under 482 is based on the principle ex debito justitia, that is, pass orders to do real and substantial justice. It is used to do justice and undo the wrong. Now, before considering the circumstances under which the High Court exercises its inherent powers, it may be interesting to trace out the origin of such powers. The concept of inherent powers can be traced to common law and the England court system. Common law recognized superior courts of records. The superior court is a court of general competence which typically has unlimited jurisdiction with regard to civil and criminal cases. In the case of a superior court of record, it is for the court to consider whether any matter falls under its jurisdiction or not. According to Halsbury's Law of England, quote, prima facie no matter is deemed to be beyond the jurisdiction of a superior court unless it is expressly shown to be so, while nothing is within the jurisdiction of an inferior court unless it is expressly shown on the face of the proceedings that the particular matter is within the cognizance of the particular court, unquote. Therefore, by the very nature of its superiority, the superior courts could exercise powers to do complete justice. It is this power which was exercised by the superior courts of record that came to be recognized as inherent power of the court. Regarding the origin of inherent powers in the courts in India, during the early part of 18th century, the British acquired sovereignty in India, and in the year 1823, by way of letters patent, the Third Supreme Court was established in Bombay. This was in addition to the existing two Supreme Courts at Madras and Calcutta. These three Supreme Courts were considered superior courts of records and similar to the superior courts of records in England. It had inherent powers to do complete justice. Subsequently, in the year 1861, British Parliament passed the enactment called the Indian High Courts Act of 1861, and the three Supreme Courts were revoked and new High Courts were established in their place. The three High Courts enjoyed and still enjoy the original jurisdiction and continued to be the superior courts of records and thus had its inherent powers intact. The other high courts were similarly established, minus the original civil jurisdiction which the three high courts of Madras, Calcutta, and Bombay enjoy under the letters patent. The Criminal Procedure Code of India was more crystallized in the year 1882, although there have been few codes prior to it, and then it was amended in 1898. It's interesting to note that CRPC of 1898 initially did not have any specific provision recognizing the inherent power of the High Court. It was taken for granted that the High Court, being a superior court of records, had the vested right of inherent powers and there was no necessity of a formal recognition to it. However, it was only as a reminder that the High Courts have inherent power to pass orders to render justice that by an amendment in the year 1923, Section 561 capital A was created and added to the 1898 Code. The reason to have added this provision also stems from the fact that by then the Code of Civil Procedure was enacted in the year 1908 and it contained in it a specific provision under Section 151 which recognized the inherent power of court in civil matters. It was seen then that though under the civil code there is a specific power recognizing the inherent powers, there was no such corresponding recognition under the Code of Criminal Procedure. Therefore, in order to avoid any confusion, Section 561 capital A was added to the Code of Criminal Procedure with one major difference being that the inherent power was recognized only of the High Court and not of the trial court. Otherwise, the remaining wordings and object remain the same, that is to pass necessary orders, to prevent abuse of process of court, and to attain the ends of justice. Section 482 of the 1973 Code is a replica of Section 561 capital A of the old Code. It reads, "Nothing in this code shall be deemed to limit or affect the inherent power of the High Court to make such orders as may be necessary. 1. To give effect to any order under the code. 2. To prevent abuse of process of court. And 3. Or otherwise to secure the ends of justice." If these three circumstances are scrutinized closely, then it becomes apparent that they will clearly overlap one another. Securing the ends of justice even covers in it the first two parts, that is giving effect to the orders under the code and to prevent the abuse of process of court. The words "to prevent abuse of process of court" or "to secure the ends of justice" are incapable of precise definitions. The framers of the code could not have provided all the cases that should be included within the meaning of these words. Since this inherent power is so large and wide, it was left only to the discretion of the High Court to judiciously use this power, and since the power is discretionary, it could refuse to use the same. Next, the recognition of the inherent power post-independence and the interplay between provisions under the Constitution and the inherent power under the Code. As I pointed out, Section 561A of the old Code recognized inherent powers of the High Court. Post-independence, and with the Constitution of India being enacted and adopted on 26th November 1949 and commencing from 26th January 1950, Article 225 of the Constitution recognized the jurisdiction and power of the existing high courts which naturally included its inherent powers. So also Article 215 recognized the High Court to be a court of record, having all the powers of such court, including the power to punish for contempt of itself. This is nothing but recognizing High Court to be a superior court of records. And the natural corollary to this is that recognition of its inherent powers. The Constitution confirmed and revested in the High Court all existing powers and jurisdiction, including its inherent powers. So far as the Supreme Court is concerned, in view of powers conferred by the Constitution to the Supreme Court, there was no need or necessity to specifically confer or recognize any inherent powers thereto. The power of the Supreme Court under Article 142 to do complete justice, coupled with the plenary and the residuary power under Articles 32 and 136, embrace the power to quash criminal proceedings before any court. This is an ancillary power with no limit. As regard the High Court, Articles 226 and 227 contain plenary, summary, preliminary, prerogative and fundamental powers of the High Court. All these are synonyms for its inherent powers. The power under Article 226 and 227 of the Constitution of India is interchangeable with Section 482 CRPC when it deals with criminal jurisdiction. The objective of both is to aid the process of administration of justice. The High Court is allowed substantial latitude in applying the powers interchangeably. Therefore, when it comes to the administration of criminal justice, there is a meeting point of the inherent powers of the High Court under 482 CRPC and the original jurisdiction of the High Court under Article 226 of the Constitution. If an accused establishes that there has been an infringement of his fundamental right under Article 19 or 21 because of the registration of an FIR or investigation thereto, then the High Court can exercise its inherent powers under 482 and quash such proceedings. If a person has been deprived of his personal liberty without following the procedure established by law, or has been subjected to custodial violence, then the High Court can interfere by exercising its writ powers or its inherent powers and can even direct compensation to be paid. This was held in D.K. Basu's case. So also, if it is established by the accused that his fundamental right to speedy trial has been violated for no fault of his, or his fundamental right to speech and expression has been curtailed illegally, or his right to assemble peacefully without arms, if it is violated, or his right of privacy is being violated, even in such cases, along with exercising powers under Article 226, the High Court can exercise its inherent powers under Section 482 CRPC to undo the wrong. In some sense, the inherent powers under 482 is more wide than Article 226 for the reason that the court exercising its writ jurisdiction is more confined with violation of fundamental rights guaranteed under Part 3 of the Constitution, though it does have powers to issue writs for other purposes also. Whereas there is no such restriction under the inherent powers under 482 CRPC, which is used to attain the ends of justice. Similarly, the supervisionary power of the High Court under Article 227 of the Constitution shares qualities with the inherent power of the High Court under 482 CRPC and its power of exercising continuous superintendence over the courts of judicial magistrates under Section 483 CRPC. When we speak of superintendence, it is not merely administrative in nature. It is judicial supervision. In a rule of law society, the inferior court should not be allowed to run berserk and the power under Article 227 provides for an effective control. In criminal justice, the inherent powers under 482 and supervisory powers under 483 exist for this very purpose. They share the same ingredients with writ powers and have the same character and limitations. The nomenclature of a petition, whether under Article 226 or under 482 CRPC, is not relevant and is of no consequence. Petition under Article 226 can be treated as one under Article 227 or under Section 482 CRPC. The recent Asian resurfacing of road agency case reiterates this principle. Prior to the enactment of the Criminal Procedure Code of 1973, there were some important decisions regarding the inherent powers of the High Court under Section 561 capital A of the 1898 Code. Two decisions stand out. King Emperor versus Khwaja Nazir Ahmad, which is a Privy Council judgment of 1945, and R.P. Kapoor versus State of Punjab, a Supreme Court ruling in the year 1960. In Khwaja Nazir's case, the question that arose before the 5-judge judicial committee of the Privy Council was whether the High Court had powers under Section 561A of the old code to quash all proceedings taken in pursuance of the first information report. The Privy Council, considering the facts of that case, did not quash the investigation. However, it recognized the inherent power of the High Court to quash proceedings in deserving cases. In fact, it indicated two circumstances: no offence made out, or police investigating a non-cognizable case without the prior permission of the magistrate. Then the High Court could be justified in quashing the proceedings. In this judgment, Privy Council would reiterate that the inherent power is not conferred by the code, but it is a power which the High Court inherently possesses, which is merely recognized by the code. Now, in R.P. Kapoor's case, 1960, even in this case, the Supreme Court refused to quash a pending investigation. However, it has gone on to indicate three categories of cases as illustrations where the inherent jurisdiction can and should be exercised by the High Court for quashing criminal proceedings. The three categories spelled out are: 1. Where there is a legal bar against the institution or continuation of the proceedings. 2. Where the allegations in the FIR or complaint did not make out the offences alleged. And 3. Where either there was no legal evidence adduced in support of the charge, or the evidence which is adduced clearly and manifestly failed to prove the charge. Therefore, R.P. Kapoor's case, where the Supreme Court laid down certain categories as illustrations, paved way for development of more such categories in other leading judgments thereafter. Post-enactment of the Code of Criminal Procedure 1973, Section 482 CRPC, which is identical to 561A of the old code, it recognized the inherent powers of the High Court. The Supreme Court often formulated and reformulated the concept of inherent powers. It has tried to streamline the contours of the inherent power. It's not a case of structuring the inherent powers, but more so affording some guidelines when coming to which would come to the use, so that it guides this unlimited power. Post 1973, there have been a catena of decisions when it comes to interpreting the circumstances and the illustrations of the categories of cases where the High Court would be justified in exercising its inherent powers under 482 or its ordinary original jurisdiction under Article 226 of the Constitution of India. Their classical expositions of law found in the case of Nagawa, Swapna Kumar Guha, Pratibha Rani, Madhav Rao Sindhya, and the essence of all these judgments has been capsulated in the classical judgment rendered by His Lordship Justice Ratnavel Pandian in the case of State of Haryana versus Bhajanlal. It is in this landmark judgment that the 7 illustrative categorizations regarding quashing was laid, and that holds the field even to this date. The backdrop of this case, Bhajanlal's case, was that there was an FIR registered against Bhajanlal, a public servant, on allegation of having acquired disproportionate asset beyond his legal means, thereby constituting offences punishable under the Penal Code and the Prevention of Corruption Act. Bhajanlal challenged the registration and initiation of the FIR by filing writ petition before the High Court. The division bench of the High Court of Punjab and Haryana allowed the writ petition and quashed the FIR. State of Haryana challenged the order before the Supreme Court, which allowed the challenge, set aside the order of the High Court, and permitted the investigation by the police to continue. However, having analyzed the law on the subject of 482 CRPC and considering all the leading judgments available then, the Supreme Court laid down an illustrative 7 categories when the High Court would be justified in quashing a criminal proceeding. These illustrations include exercise of powers to quash criminal proceedings when the allegations in the FIR or complaint, even believed to be true, would not disclose any offence. Where no cognizable offence is disclosed, and contrary to the provisions of the law, the magistrate has taken cognizance of the offence. Where the allegations are so absurd and inherently improbable, which mocks the continuation of the proceedings. Where there is an express legal bar in the code, and where the criminal proceeding is manifestly attended with malafide or has been instituted only to spite the accused due to private and personal grudge. While laying down these categories, the court also gave a note of caution that the power of quashing should be sparingly used, with circumspection, and in rarest of rare cases. It also stated that the High Court should not embark upon an inquiry to ascertain the reliability or genuineness of the allegation while exercising its inherent powers. It also noted that the inherent powers do not confer an arbitrary jurisdiction to the court to act according to its whims or caprice. Now, adding to this, I intend pointing out 9 other circumstances that I have culled out from various decisions of the Apex Court where the High Court should not be exercising its inherent powers. The first would be, there is an alternate and efficacious remedy available. It is not that a 482 petition is not maintainable, it is more so because of judicial discipline. Although the availability of an alternative and efficacious remedy is not a bar for the exercise of the inherent powers, normally the High Court would prefer an aggrieved to avail the alternate and efficacious remedy before it exercises its inherent powers. Inherent power, being a residuary power, should not be used as a substitute in matters that have been specifically been provided for in the code. We have Amit Kapoor's case of 2012 which deals with this. Second, the High Court, even while exercising inherent power, should not rely on documents which are not part of the investigation papers or lower court records. The only exception is documents of sterling quality, of unimpeachable nature, which the complainant cannot dispute. That can be looked into. Third, the power under 482 should not be used to stifle a legitimate prosecution. Fourth, when facts are incomplete or hazy, the High Court, while exercising its inherent power, does not conduct a trial or appreciate evidence. The exercise of the power is used to intervene for preventing a palpable abuse of legal process. 5. As against charges framed against an accused, although it can be interfered with by exercising inherent powers, the same has to be exercised very sparingly, and that too in the rarest of rare cases. 6. Where transaction that disclose both a civil as well as a criminal dispute. There are certain offences like breach of trust, cheating, which may involve both a civil wrong as well as a crime. In such cases, the inherent power is not used to quash the criminal proceeding where the allegations clearly disclose the ingredients of the offences alleged. Seventhly, not to grant anticipatory bail by invoking inherent powers. This is because 438 CRPC is an independent provision which requires certain prerequisites for its consideration. And eighth, the power is not to be exercised when the subject matter is covered under some other specific provision of the code. In other words, not to transgress in the guise of exercising inherent power, notwithstanding the fact that the provision commences with the words, "Nothing in this code shall be deemed to limit or affect the inherent power of the High Court." So, take for example, against an order of conviction, there lies a statutory appeal. Instead of availing this statutory remedy, if the accused invokes High Court inherent powers, then the same is not to be exercised. We have Arun Shankar Shukla's case on this aspect. Ninth, an inherent power cannot be invoked to rehear an appeal dismissed in default. These are the 9 aspects where inherent power is not to be used. Although there have been a number of landmark judgments post Bhajanlal, we can still safely say that as on date, when the High Court considers exercising its inherent powers, it would always use Bhajanlal as its pointer to see as to whether the case on hand is fit to quash or not. Now, based on various judgments, I have put together 19 circumstances where the High Court is justified in exercising its inherent powers. The first, as distinguished from serious offences, there may be criminal cases which have an overwhelming or predominant element of civil dispute. By mere clever drafting, a cloak of criminality may be sought to be given to such disputes. Instances of these cases are seen in commercial transactions or contractual disputes where there is no element of criminal mens rea, but still criminal proceedings are initiated only to arm twist the debtor to pay up. In such cases, the High Court may exercise its inherent power to prevent abuse of process of court and to meet the ends of justice. We have Paramjit Batra's case 2012 on this aspect. 2. Where offences that are again not serious in nature, to categorize them as offences against the society at large. And though these offences are categorized as non-computable offences under the code, if the parties intend settling their disputes mutually, then the High Court may exercise its inherent power to quash the proceedings. The leading case is Gyan Singh in the year 2012. 3. Where there has been registration of an FIR or a filing of a complaint under 200 CRPC against a medical practitioner alleging criminal negligence, and if this has been done without following the mandate regarding obtaining third-party opinion prior to initiation of proceedings, then the High Court, using its inherent powers, may quash the proceedings. This has been laid down in Jacob Matthews' case in 2005. It was a three-judge bench. 4. Where the orders under the code or the mandatory provisions under the code are not scrupulously followed, then the inherent power can be used to pass such orders as may be required to give effect to the various provisions of the code. Now, for example, if the magistrate on receipt of a B report does not follow the mandate under the code and merely takes cognizance of the report, then the High Court would be justified in exercising its powers to set right the illegality. Similarly, if a complaint is referred for investigation under 156(3) of the CRPC without due application of mind, or if cognizance is taken in a mechanical manner without judicious application of mind, or issuance of process without proper judicial scrutiny to the allegations on record. Now, these are all instances where inherent powers are exercised to set right the illegality. We have Maqsood Syed's case of 2008, M.K. Ayyappa's case in 2013, and Pepsi case in 1998, which deal with this aspect. 5. So also, if a complaint has been referred for investigation under 156(3) of the CRPC without the complaint being accompanied by an affidavit of the complainant to the effect that he has unsuccessfully approached the police for registration of FIR, then the High Court may exercise its inherent power and set aside the 156(3) reference. Priyanka Srivatsa's case of 2015. 6. To give effect to law laid down by the Apex Court. It is in this context that the order passed by the Constitution Bench in Lalita Kumari's case is of most relevance, 2014. What happened in that case was the informant, a father of a kidnapped daughter, he would go to the police station to get registered an FIR. Now, although the allegations disclosed a cognizable offence, the station house officer refused to register the FIR. Therefore, the point that came up for consideration before the Supreme Court was whether the station house officer is bound to register the FIR if allegations disclose a cognizable offence, or whether he had the power to conduct a preliminary inquiry in order to test the veracity of the information. The Constitution Bench has held that when an information discloses a cognizable offence, then it is mandatory for the police to register the FIR and commence investigation. They have no jurisdiction or power to refuse registration of the FIR. However, as an exception, in about 5 categories of cases, the police can conduct a preliminary inquiry to ascertain whether the allegations constitute a cognizable offence or not, and then if a cognizable offence is disclosed, to register the FIR. This preliminary inquiry has to be completed within 7 days. It was subsequently modified to 15 days in normal cases and 6 weeks in exceptional cases. This modification was in March 2014. The 5 exceptions as in illustrations where preliminary inquiry is permitted are: 1. Matrimonial disputes, 2. Commercial offences, 3. Medical negligence cases, 4. Corruption cases, and 5. Cases where there has been an abnormal delay or laches in initiating the criminal prosecution. Now, this is the ratio laid down by the Constitution Bench. The question that arises is, despite such ratio, what is the remedy to an informant if the investigating agency does not follow the law? The answer to this is simple. You invoke the inherent power of the High Court, which can pass suitable orders to ensure compliance. So this is in a manner giving effect to orders under the code, which 482 covers. 7. Similarly, the High Court can exercise its inherent powers to give appropriate direction to investigating agency even regarding circumstances which are not covered under the code. Now take for example, the code does not prescribe any outer limit for completion of investigation. If in a given case there is an abnormal delay in investigation, then the High Court would be justified in exercising its inherent powers and directing the agency to complete investigation within a specified time. Right to speedy trial is recognized to be a fundamental right under Article 21 of the Constitution. If the investigating agency deprives the accused of any right, like his right to consult his lawyer or to have the presence of his lawyer at the time of questioning, then the High Court can exercise its inherent power to ensure the protection of such rights. Similarly, allegations of improper investigation. Then the High Court can exercise inherent powers, can direct the change of investigating agency. The power to direct a central agency such as the CBI to investigate a given case is also available to the High Court, which has been recognized by a constitutional bench. 8th, quashing a second FIR which is on the same cause of action as the first. The High Court, by adopting the doctrine of test of sameness, can exercise its inherent power and quash a second FIR so as to prevent abuse of process of court and in the aids of ends of justice. T.T. Antony's case of 2001 covers this issue. 9. The High Court also has power to pass suitable directions to the trial court or any other subordinate court. It can direct the trial court to complete the proceedings within a given time or any other suitable directions that aids meeting up the ends of justice. 10. So also the jurisdiction is not limited to cases that are pending before the High Court dealing with 482 petitions alone. The power can be exercised in appropriate cases even when the High Court is exercising its appellate or revisional jurisdiction. 11. Inherent power can also be exercised suo motu. Take for example, an order passed by a magistrate which is wholly without jurisdiction. It comes to the notice of the High Court. Then the High Court can interfere with it even suo motu. Therefore, the High Court has the power to provide relief to the accused or to the complainant even if he has not filed a petition invoking its inherent powers. 12. Orders which are purely interlocutory in nature. Now, there is no remedy to challenge the same under the code except to approach the High Court to seek remedy against it. 13. In summons cases, there is no specific provision to seek discharge of the accused. Then in a given case, if absolutely no case is made out against the accused, the High Court exercising inherent powers can quash the proceedings. 14. There is no concept of vicarious liability under the penal code. In a given case, the allegation is only against a corporate entity, say a company, but summons is issued to the directors for alleged penal offences. Then the High Court can exercise its inherent powers to quash the same. Sunil Bharti Mittal's case, it dealt with the doctrine of alter ego, which is contrary to the vicarious liability doctrine. 15. Orders which are not purely interlocutory in nature but are intermediatory in nature. Now, this word intermediatory, though not in the code, has been coined by the Apex Court in the famous Madhulimay's case, 1977. Under the code, we find only two categories of orders that can be passed: interlocutory orders and final orders. Challenge to the same can be made by invoking the inherent powers of the High Court under 482 or under Article 227 of the Constitution, notwithstanding the fact that a revision lies against such intermediary orders. This position of law was laid down by a three-judge bench of the Supreme Court quite recently in Asian Resurfacing of Road Agency Private Limited, 2018. 16. Where a statutory bar affects the inherent powers. A statutory bar does not affect the inherent powers. Take for instance 19(3)(c) of the Prevention of Corruption Act, which prohibits stay of proceedings under the Act. Even this statutory bar will not affect the inherent power of the High Court under 482 to stay the proceedings in appropriate cases. This has been emphasized by the Supreme Court again in the case of Asian Resurfacing of Road Agency, 2018. Next, 17. Power to order costs. Although there is no express provision in the code regarding power to order cost, it is now well recognized that in appropriate cases, the High Court exercising its inherent power can impose cost on the petitioner or respondent. This was in Mary Angel's case in 1999. 18. As regard the maintainability of a second 482 petition. While it is settled law that it is impermissible to reopen or review a judgment even under 482 in view of the specific bar under 362 CRPC, Hari Singh's case 2001, however, the High Court can in appropriate cases where there are subsequent developments and change in circumstance, it can entertain a second 482 petition and grant relief. We find this in K.V. Rajendran's case, the year 2008. And lastly, 19, the power to expunge remarks. When the order or judgment of the lower court contains unwanted, scandalous, objectionable remarks, then the High Court, while exercising its inherent powers, can expunge such remark. Now this was held in B.K. Jain's case of 2008. There are numerous other circumstances under which the inherent power can be exercised, mainly because the power is so wide, unlimited, and discretionary. The only limit is what the court itself decides as its limit. The restraint to this power is self-imposed. Like the saying goes, with great power comes greater responsibility. This is very apt when it comes to the exercise of inherent powers by the High Court. However, it cannot be emphasized enough that the use of such wide power is very much required to do substantial justice. How this power is to be used depends on the capacity of the judge dealing with this jurisdiction. A court which is sound on its understanding of men and matters and has immense common sense can do substantial justice while exercising these inherent powers. Court should not hesitate to quash proceedings when the occasion arises. There are numerous frivolous criminal litigations pending in court, and its initiation and continuation is not to attain the ends of justice, but is merely aimed at being vindictive, vexatious, or simply to cause harassment to the accused. The judicial process should not be an instrument of oppression or needless harassment. It is in such cases that the High Court should not hesitate to quash the proceedings, which will not only save the valuable judicial time of the courts below, but it will also aid in reducing the ever-growing pendency of cases. In my humble belief, dispensation of speedy and effective justice by exercising the superlative inherent power is a need of the hour. Hope this presentation can be of some aid while demystifying the understanding of inherent powers of the High Court. Thank you for your patience.